to call the cops on me because I wouldn't give her free gas from my own fuel pump. Just take a second and really imagine the mindset required to think that was reasonable. I was standing in my driveway, early afternoon sun warming the concrete, the steady mechanical hum of diesel flowing into my truck, filling the air. It was a familiar, almost comforting sound. Routine. Predictable. I had one hand resting on the pump handle, the other on my hip, thinking about nothing more serious than whether I'd finish before the heat got unbearable. That's when I heard the sharp, rapid clicking of heels cutting across the gravel. Not walking, marching. Purposeful. Aggressive. I looked up to see Brenda Ashworth striding toward me like she owned the place, chin lifted, sunglasses pushed up on her head, lips pressed into that permanent expression of superiority she wore like armor. She didn't slow down. She didn't wave. She didn't ask if now was a good time. She stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume cutting through the diesel fumes. "Fill up my Range Rover, Marcus," she said flatly, like she was giving an order to an employee who'd forgotten his job. As HOA president, I shouldn't have to pay for gas when residents have fuel available. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. I waited for a smile, a hint of sarcasm, anything to signal this was some kind of twisted attempt at humor. Nothing. Just expectation. Entitlement. When it finally registered that she was serious, I shook my head once and said, "No, this is my fuel. My property." That should have been the end of it. A normal person might have scoffed, muttered something under their breath, and walked away. Brenda did none of that. Her face tightened, eyes narrowing as if I had just challenged her authority in front of an audience. Without another word, she reached into her designer purse, pulled out her phone, and started dialing. "I need police assistance," she said loudly, projecting her voice so the neighbors could hear. "This man is being hostile and threatening me." I stood there stunned. The pump still running, diesel splashing rhythmically into my tank. Threatening? I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't stepped toward her. I hadn't even taken my hand off the pump. The absurdity of it hit me all at once, followed by something colder, recognition. This wasn't confusion. This was strategy. The smell in the air was thick now. Diesel, hot concrete, her perfume, and something else, desperation. Because here's what Brenda didn't understand in that moment. She had just made the worst possible choice. She had no idea who she was actually accusing or what kind of chain reaction she was setting in motion. Before this story goes any further, I should properly introduce myself. My name is Marcus Kellerman. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent most of my life dealing with systems, authority, and consequences. I started out in military logistics straight out of my 20s, back when I still believed everything worked the way it was supposed to if you followed the rules closely enough. That job taught me quickly that preparation wasn't suggestion. It was survival. If you forgot a detail, someone paid for it. For 20 years, my world revolved around schedules, supply chains, and fuel. Diesel fumes soaked into my clothes and my skin. MREs became meals you ate without thinking. I moved equipment and people across 3 continents, learned how to stay calm when things went sideways, and how to recognize the difference between real authority and someone pretending to have it. Then life blindsided me in a way no logistics manual could prepare for. My wife, Sarah, was diagnosed with cancer. 2 years of treatments followed. Hospitals replaced home. Paperwork replaced sleep. Medical bills stacked higher than anything I'd ever managed overseas. When she passed last spring, the silence in our house became unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a memory I wasn't ready to face. I couldn't stay there. So I sold the house, packed what mattered, and moved to Willowbrook Estates. It looked like a place where nothing dramatic ever happened. Tree-lined streets, modest homes, people who smiled politely and kept to themselves. I thought I'd found somewhere quiet enough to heal. I was wrong. Willowbrook's HOA used to be run by a retired teacher who kept things sensible. Then Brenda Ashworth moved in, bringing her gated community mindset and personal ambitions with her. She didn't see neighbors. She saw subjects. And when she learned about my fuel pump, something that had been legal, permitted, and there long before she arrived, she saw an opportunity. Standing there in my driveway, Listening to her tell a 911 dispatcher that I was dangerous, I realized something important. This wasn't about gas. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. She expected obedience, and the moment she didn't get it, she reached for the heaviest weapon she thought she had. What she didn't know was that she just invited the very system she loved to weaponize into her own backyard. And once that door opens, it doesn't close quietly. Willowbrook Estates, on the surface, looks like the kind of place real estate brochures love to brag about. About 200 homes arranged along quiet, looping streets lined with mature trees. Lawns trimmed neatly, mailboxes standing at attention, kids riding bikes in lazy circles until dinner. Most of the people who live here work regular jobs, pay their bills, and want nothing more than a little peace when they come home at night. It's the sort of neighborhood where people wave when you pass, exchange small talk about the weather, and assume everyone else is playing by the same basic rules. For a long time, that assumption was mostly true. The Homeowners Association used to be run by Mrs. Henderson, a retired school teacher who treated the role like what was supposed to be, a way to keep things functional, not a source of personal power. Her rules were straightforward. Mow your lawn. Don't let your house fall apart. Pay your dues on time. Nothing excessive, nothing punitive. If someone slipped up, she'd knock on their door and talk to them before ever reaching for a fine. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. Then Brenda Ashworth moved in. She arrived from a gated community on the other side of the city, the kind where security guards check IDs and the houses look more like private resorts than homes. Brenda brought that mindset with her, along with a spotless Range Rover, designer clothes, and an unshakable belief that her standards were the only standards that mattered. She was a real estate agent by trade, and everything about the neighborhood immediately became a project in her eyes. Within months, she started attending HOA meetings regularly. She talked a lot about elevating community, protecting property values, and removing undesirable elements. The words sounded professional enough, but there was always an edge underneath them. When Mrs. Henderson stepped down due to health issues, Brenda stepped forward with a polished campaign and a smile that promised order. She won the presidency in under 8 months. That's when things changed. At first, it was subtle. Violation notices started appearing in mailboxes more frequently. The Rodriguez family down the street received a warning for excessive vehicle parking. They had 2 cars, one for each adult working full-time. Mr. Orion, an elderly widower who spent his mornings tending a small vegetable garden, was fined because his tomatoes were inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetics. A young black couple 2 streets overgot harassment letters for installing a basketball hoop for their kids, even though similar hoops sat untouched in other yards. Patterns like that don't take long to notice if you're paying attention. Certain houses were scrutinized constantly. Others, usually the ones that looked like Brenda or socialized with Brenda, were left alone. Rules weren't being enforced evenly anymore. They were being weaponized. I tried to stay out of it. I'd only lived in Willowbrook a short time, and after everything I'd been through, conflict was the last thing I wanted. I kept my head down, restored old trucks in my garage, and nodded politely when I passed neighbors on the sidewalk. But Brenda didn't overlook me for long. The fuel pump was what caught her eye. When I bought my house, it came with a detached garage and workshop that immediately felt like a lifeline. Restoring vintage trucks gave me something to focus on, something tangible to rebuild, when everything else in my life felt broken. The previous owner had been a farmer and had legally installed a diesel pump for personal use, complete with agricultural permits and annual inspections. Everything was documented. Everything was legal. I invested in upgrading it. $15,000 worth of professional-grade equipment, safety features that exceeded code, clear signage marking it as private property, fire marshal inspections that passed without issue. The steady smell of diesel and motor oil became a kind of therapy for me, grounding in a way nothing else was. Then the power went out one winter night. A storm rolled through and knocked electricity out across most of Willowbrook. Generators sputtered and died as fuel ran low. That's when neighbors started knocking on my door. Elderly couples needing to keep medical equipment running. A single mother trying to keep her house warm for her kids. I didn't charge anyone. I didn't advertise. I just helped where I could. Word traveled fast. Brenda noticed. She came by one morning not long after, heels clicking like warning shots on pavement. She asked pointed questions about zoning, shared resources, and whether my pump was available to the community. Her tone made it clear she already had a conclusion in mind. When I showed her the permits and explained the agricultural exemption, her smile tightened. Well, she said, eyes narrowing, we'll see about that. That was the moment I understood I'd been placed on her list. From then on, every interaction felt calculated. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was testing limits, looking for leverage. And in her mind, my fuel pump wasn't just an installation she disliked. It was a symbol, something she didn't control, something that made me useful to others without going through her. People like Brenda can't tolerate that. She didn't care that the pump had helped keep neighbors alive during outages. She didn't care that it was legal or safe. What mattered was that it existed outside her authority. And for someone who had built her identity around being in charge, that was unacceptable. I didn't know then how far she was willing to go to eliminate that threat. But looking back, all the signs were there. The selective enforcement, the carefully chosen targets, the obsession with image over reality. Willowbrook wasn't just a neighborhood to Brenda. It was a stage. And anyone who didn't play their assigned role was going to be dealt with one violation notice at a time. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, long enough for Brenda to pace at the edge of my driveway, phone still in her hand, occasionally shooting me looks that were meant to feel intimidating. I finished fueling my truck and shut the pump off, replacing the nozzle carefully, deliberately. Every movement I made was calm, measured. Years in logistics taught me that when authority shows up, the person who looks the least rattled usually has the upper hand. 2 patrol cars rolled in and parked along the curb. Officers stepped out, one older, one younger, both scanning the scene like they expected something far more dramatic than a man standing beside a fuel pump and a woman with crossed arms and an inflated sense of righteousness. Brenda rushed toward them before they even had the doors closed. "Thank God you're here," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. This man threatened me. He has an illegal fuel station in a residential neighborhood and refused to comply when I told him to stop. The older officer raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "Sir, is that accurate?" "No," I said simply. Nothing she said is accurate. That seemed to irritate Brenda more than shouting would have. She launched into a rehearsed speech about safety risks, environmental hazards, and her authority as HOA president. She emphasized the word president every time she used it, as if it carried legal weight beyond her imagination. The younger officer walked over to the pump, crouched slightly, and examined the inspection tags bolted to the frame. He ran his fingers over the serial numbers, then stood and nodded once, almost imperceptibly, toward his partner. "Sir," the older officer said to me, "do you have documentation for this installation?" "Inside," I replied. "I'll grab it." Brenda opened her mouth, probably to protest me leaving her line of sight, but the officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, let him get the paperwork." I returned a moment later with a folder I kept ready for exactly this kind of situation. Permits, inspection reports, fire marshal approvals, environmental compliance certificates. I handed it over without a word. The officers flipped through the pages carefully, the sound of paper turning punctuating the silence. Brenda's confidence began to crack. "Well," she said quickly, "even if it's permitted, it's being misused. He's distributing fuel to residents. That makes a shared utility, which falls under HOA jurisdiction." "That's not how that works," the older officer said, not unkindly, but firmly. Brenda stiffened. "I'm very familiar with HOA law." The officer met her gaze. "I'm very familiar with state law. This installation is legal, private, and there's no evidence of a crime here." She turned on me then, eyes sharp with resentment. "You can't just do whatever you want because you think you're above the rules." I finally spoke more than a sentence. "I follow the rules. I just don't follow yours." That did it. Her face flushed, anger boiling over the carefully curated professionalism. "You are a danger to this community," she snapped, "and I will make sure this is shut down." The officers exchanged a look. The older one sighed, clearly ready to wrap things up. "Ma'am, making false statements to emergency services isn't something we take lightly. I suggest you let this go." Brenda's mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't used to being warned. She was used to being obeyed. The patrol cars left soon after, tires crunching over gravel as they pulled away. Brenda stood there a moment longer, glaring at me like she was memorizing my face for future battles. Then she turned sharply and walked back to her SUV, slamming the door hard enough to echo down the street. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It accused me of operating a commercial fuel distribution center in violation of community standards. The fines were aggressive. The language was deliberately vague. They demanded immediate cessation of use and threatened liens against my property. I read it twice, then laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Over the next week, the pressure increased. More letters, emails, a notice posted on my door while I was out, photographed and circulated on the HOA's private social media page with a caption about dangerous violations. Neighbors started asking questions. Some were worried. Others were quietly supportive, whispering thanks and encouragement when no one else was around. One evening, Mr. Orion shuffled up my driveway with a plate of cookies and a tired smile. "She's after you now," he said. "Means you did something right." That night, I sat at my kitchen table and spread everything out. HOA bylaws, state statutes, county zoning codes. I hadn't wanted to fight, but if Brenda insisted on one, I wasn't going to stumble into it unprepared. I noticed inconsistencies almost immediately. Clauses she cited that didn't apply. Authorities she claimed that didn't exist. Procedures she skipped entirely. And then I found something interesting. Buried deep in the HOA financial disclosures was a line item for infrastructure development consultations. The payments were irregular, large, made to a shell LLC I recognized from my time dealing with contractors overseas. The name rang alarm bells. The more I looked, the more threads appeared. Rezoning discussions that hadn't been disclosed to residents. Emails forwarded accidentally to the wrong distribution list. Mentions of fuel access and emergency preparedness that sounded a lot like monetization. Brenda hadn't wanted my pump shut down because it was dangerous. She wanted it because it competed with something she was planning. And that meant this wasn't just harassment anymore. It was corruption. And corruption, unlike intimidation, leaves a paper trail. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet house, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Focus. Brenda thought she was escalating. She had no idea she'd just given me permission to respond in kind. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The more I dug, the clearer everything became, like a map slowly filling itself in. Brenda's sudden obsession with my fuel pump, the selective enforcement, the vague threats wrapped in official-sounding language, it all pointed in the same direction. She wasn't trying to protect Willowbrook. She was trying to position herself. I requested the HOA's full financial records under the state's open record statute, something every homeowner had the legal right to do. The request alone caused a stir. Within hours, my inbox filled with emails from the HOA's management company asking me to clarify my intentions. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The law was on my side, and they knew it. The documents arrived a week later in a thick digital file. I printed everything. Old habit. Paper tells a story better when it's spread out in front of you. Late into the night, I highlighted transfers, cross-referenced dates, and traced money through accounts that didn't quite line up. The Shell LLC appeared again and again, always tied to consulting services that never seemed to produce anything tangible. Then I found the meeting minutes, or rather, the absence of them. Entire board discussions referenced in emails had no official record. Votes that should have required homeowner approval were marked as administrative decisions. Even more troubling, there were entries about preliminary rezoning inquiries, quiet conversations with the county about emergency infrastructure hubs and private fuel access points. Language carefully chosen to sound public-spirited while hiding profit motives underneath. Brenda wasn't just planning something. She was planning to sell it. She intended to pitch Willowbrook as a resilient community, install centralized fuel storage under HOA control, and charge residents for access during outages. My pump, privately owned and freely shared, made that plan impossible. It proved her argument false before she could even make it. I compiled everything into a timeline, complete with citations, statutes, and screenshots. Then I did something Brendan never expected. I shared it, not online, not publicly. I printed copies and slid them under doors. Quietly, methodically, the same way supplies move best, without announcement. Each packet included nothing but facts and a short note inviting neighbors to an independent meeting at the community center. The room was full that night. People sat stiffly at first, unsure whether they were allowed to be there. HOA board members didn't attend. Brenda didn't attend. But the residents did. Families, retirees, people who've been fined, threatened, or quietly bullied into compliance. As I walked them through the documents, the mood shifted from confusion to anger, then to something sharper. Understanding. Questions came fast. About money, about authority, about what else had been done without their knowledge. I answered what I could and told them what I didn't yet know. Transparency builds trust faster than certainty ever could. Someone asked if this was why Brenda tried to get the police involved. I nodded. Intimidation works best early, I said, before people compare notes. The next day, the county received an anonymous complaint. So did the state HOA Oversight Board. The fire marshal followed up on zoning inquiries he'd never been informed about. Auditors requested clarification on financial discrepancies. All of it lawful. All of it documented. Brenda went quiet. No emails. No notices. No social media posts. That silence spoke volumes. Then, a week later, an emergency HOA meeting was announced. Mandatory attendance. The tone of the notice was defensive, heavy on reassurance, and light on detail. The room was tense. Brenda stood at the front, posture rigid, smile strained. She spoke about misinformation, hostile actors, and outside interference. Then the questions started. Why were funds routed through an LLC owned by her brother-in-law? Why were rezoning talks hidden? Why were residents fined under rules that didn't exist in the bylaws? She tried to deflect. She tried to dismiss. But facts don't get tired, and lies do. A motion was raised. Then another. By the end of the night, the board voted to suspend her pending investigation. She left without saying a word. Heels silent this time. A month later, she resigned. The fines against me were rescinded. The HOA bylaws were revised. An independent management company was hired. The Shell LLC vanished from the books. Life in Willowbrook didn't become perfect overnight, but it became quieter, fairer. The winter storm returned that year, heavier than before. Power lines went down again. And once again, people came to my door. I helped them, just like before. This time, no one tried to stop me. Mr. Orion stood beside me as the generator hummed, watching neighbors fill approved containers under the glow of portable lights. Funny thing, he said softly, all that trouble, just because she couldn't stand someone doing good without permission. I watched diesel flow, steady and controlled, and thought about how authority really works. Real authority doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need threats. It earns trust by serving people, not ruling them. Brenda wanted control. I just wanted to be left alone. In the end, the system she tried to weaponize did exactly what it was designed to do, once the truth was put in front of it. And Willowbrook learned something valuable in the process. Sometimes, the most powerful response isn't force. It's documentation. Life has a way of settling into a new rhythm once the noise fades. After Brenda's resignation, Willowbrook seemed to exhale. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, just a gradual easing of tension you could feel when you walked down the street. People lingered a little longer outside. Conversations stretched past polite greetings into real exchanges. The quiet didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt earned. The interim HOA board moved carefully, almost timidly at first. They knew how much damage had been done, and no one wanted to be the next person accused of overreach. Meetings became open again, minutes were posted on time, and fines dropped to a fraction of what they had been. Rules were clarified, not expanded. For the first time since I had moved in, the HOA felt like a group of neighbors instead of a private security force. I kept my distance, not out of resentment, but because I never wanted a role in any of it. My goal had always been simple: live quietly, fix old machines, help when I could, and grieve in peace. Now that the fight was over, I returned to my routines. Morning coffee on the porch, time in the workshop, long walks in the evening when the lights softened and the air cooled. People still talked about what happened, though stories have a way of sticking around when they explain things people didn't understand at the time. Neighbors compared notes about fines they'd paid, letters they'd ignored, moments they doubted themselves because someone in authority told them they were wrong. There was relief in realizing they hadn't been imagining it. One afternoon, the Rodriguez family invited me over for dinner. Nothing fancy. Home-cooked food. Kids laughing too loudly. A table crowded with mismatched plates. Mr. Rodriguez raised a glass and thanked me, not just for the fuel during the storms, but for standing up when no one else knew how. I told him the truth. I didn't do it to be brave. I said, I did it because I knew how systems work. And I knew she was lying. That seemed to resonate more than heroics ever could. The county investigation wrapped up quietly. No headlines. No dramatic arrests. Brenda's real estate license was suspended pending review, and the LLC she'd used dissolved under scrutiny. She moved out of Willowbrook not long after. Her house listed and sold within weeks. No farewell. No apology. Just absence. The HOA offered me a formal apology in writing. They even suggested reimbursing legal expenses I never actually incurred. I declined both. Closure doesn't always need documentation. Sometimes it's enough to know a line was crossed, acknowledged, and corrected. Winter deepened, and with it came more storms. Each time, the neighborhood handled things better. People coordinated, checked on each other, shared resources openly without fear of being fined for it. What Brenda had tried to centralize and monetize became decentralized and human again. Late one evening, I sat alone in the workshop, the smell of oil and metal grounding me as it always had. I was rebuilding an old engine block, hand steady, mind clear. For the first time in a long while, the grief didn't feel like it was pressing down on my chest. It was still there, but it had space to breathe. I thought about Sarah, about how she'd hated bullies, hated people who were behind titles to avoid accountability. I imagined her laughing at the idea of an HOA president thinking she outranked a fire marshal or a statute book. The thought made me smile unexpectedly. Power is a strange thing. Most people who want it aren't suited to carry it. And most people who end up wielding it responsibly never set out to do so. Brenda saw authority as something you take. I'd learned, over decades and continents, that real authority is something you're granted when others trust you not to abuse it. I never set out to teach Willowbrook a lesson, but maybe it learned one anyway. The pumps still stand in my driveway, unchanged, inspected, legal, quietly useful. I don't advertise it. I don't talk about it much, but everyone knows it's there, not as leverage, not as a bargaining chip, just as a reminder that communities work best when people look out for each other without needing permission. On the first warm day of spring, kids rode their bikes past my house again, laughing like nothing bad had ever happened here. I waved as they passed. They waved back, and for the first time since I arrived, Willowbrook felt like home.